Hey folks, I said earlier, I guess a few weeks ago, that I was going to do a video on how to do a trigger job on a Glock, any Glock. It doesn't matter what type it is, whether it's a small frame or large frame Glock, they're all similar. But before I start, I want to show you this hat. Downrange Hat Company. That's his logo, Downrange Hat Company. He can make you a hat, pretty much any design you want, any type of lettering, anything like that. He uses good hats, flex fit hats, he can do those. This is a snapback hat, but he can do pretty much any hat you want. And he does it at a reasonable price, and he's a good guy to work with. So if y'all are in the market for a hat, check out Downrange Hat Company on Instagram. That's where you can find him. You can order you a hat there. I think you'll be pleased. What I want to do today is talk about trigger jobs on Glocks. This is my Glock 34 that I built up, and I wasn't pleased with the trigger in stock form at all. It was horrible. It was about a 5.5 pound trigger pull. It just had a terrible reset. The trigger break on it was horrible. And for a gun like this, that I'm going to try to shoot fast and accurately, then I wanted to have a better trigger on it than that. So let me break this down. Let me show you what we're working with here. All right, this is my Glock 34. So it's empty, no rounds in it. We'll do some trigger pull test on it, kind of show you what the trigger feels like. Now, this trigger isn't the trigger that I put in it, but I am going to show you the trigger that I worked up and put in it. I'm going to kind of compare these two. The trigger that's in here is a trigger from a guy named, or a company, it's a guy that runs it, named Johnny Glocks Triggers. I'll explain at the end of the video why I like this trigger so much, but out of all the aftermarket triggers that I bought, and I bought a bunch of them, Zev, they're complete triggers, Agency Arms, complete drop-in triggers, you name it, I pretty much used it for Glock triggers. This is the only one that actually does what I want a Glock trigger to do. It's a super short take-up, a fairly decent break, and a super short reset. Now, let's do some trigger pull weights on this one, and then when I'm done, we'll compare it to my trigger that I did and show you that there's not a whole lot of difference. Well, basically 2 pounds. £2 4 ounces. One more, get an average. Basically 2 pounds. Let's get an average on it. 2 pounds, 1 ounce. So you're looking at a 2 pound trigger here. Now, with a 2 pound trigger, there's a lot that goes into that. But at the same time, this gun is 100% reliable as far as the trigger goes. When I say that, a lot of times in order to get a 2 pound trigger or a sub 2 pound trigger on a Glock, you've got to change the striker spring out to a light striker spring. I know Zev, they'll change theirs out to a 2 or a 3 pound striker spring. Their 4 pound striker spring is heavy for their kit. A factory Glock striker spring is 5 pounds. I have a 4.5 pound striker spring in this gun, which if you've ever done a Glock trigger job, you know that's a fairly stout trigger spring when you're wanting to get a sub 3 pound trigger in a Glock. But he does this through several different ways. He achieves that trigger pull through several different ways, and so do I. I'm producing really light trigger pulls with the one that I did. let's take this trigger out of here and show you some things that he did, some things that I've done, and kind of compare the two, and then I'm gonna put mine back in there and show you what mine breaks at. Before I do that, I wanna show you the overall trigger on the gun, what it's like when you actually get it in the gun and feel it. Now you have the safety tab, like on every Glock. You depress that, and then if you'll notice, there's very, very little take up in that trigger. A factory Glock trigger starts about right here, then you've got all that take up to there. With this one, he's eliminated all that pre-travel. That's what they call it, pre-travel. So you got that much pre-travel. Now, the one thing he's done with these triggers, this is a drop-in trigger kit. I believe he designs them to have a rolling break. Rolling break and a crisp break are two different things, of course. They sound different, they are different. With a rolling break, once you hit the wall, it continues to move until the trigger breaks. Basically, your cruciform is rolling off of the striker. With a crisp break, you get to a certain point and it just stops, and then the trigger will break from that point. A lot of that has to do with the connector you use. And there's some other things that it can have to do with, but a large part of that has to do with the connector you use. So when you're looking at this one, that's all the take up you have, that. And then you have a rolling break, and it breaks right around 2.5 pounds. And it's a very nice break. It's not herky or jerky or gritty, anything like that, and I'll show you why. Let's take this thing out of the gun and try to see why the trigger is as good as it is. Now, if you'll notice, this is the Johnny Glocks firing pin safety plunger. I don't have a factory safety plunger laying around to show you. If I did, you would see the difference. But he's beveled all the way around the edges, and then he's polished the entire thing to just a high shine. And he's done an excellent job at that. I mean, he's done an excellent job at it. There's not a rough surface on that. This is my striker that I did myself. You can't really tell it with it in the gun, so I'm going to take it out and kind of show you. But if you've ever watched any of those little cheap 25-cent Glock trigger job videos, you already know what I'm going to do, but this isn't a 25-cent trigger job. I actually took a India stone and flattened that off. Then I took all of the tooling marks out of it. I don't think it's coming in on video, I'm not sure, but the whole face of that striker is smooth like glass. You can see something right there, but you can't feel it with your fingernail, but that whole face of that striker is literally like glass. That's important. You want that surface to be super clean, but you also want to be careful with that surface not to remove too much metal, and you don't really want to shorten it either. I don't like to shorten the length of that from here to here. You want to keep it the same length. Let me put this back in the gun, and I'm going to break my frame down, and I'm going to show you something that he does to his trigger bars that I can do some of it, but not all of it. Now I'm going to start by taking my trigger pin out. Now, you're going to see a lot of people, hear a lot of people, and they use a hammer sometimes to take that trigger pin out. Do not use a hammer to take that trigger pin out. There's grooves on this that get hung on that slide stop. If you use a hammer to take it out, you can round off that slide stop, and it'll make where your pin might possibly walk out later on. All you have to do is move that slide stop front and back, and while applying pressure on the side, and you'll line it up, and that pin will be able to come out. The rest of the pins come out pretty easy. They come out just like a stock Glock. Now, getting this thing out can be a bear sometimes, because on a stock Glock, your lock and block stops right here, and it just lifts right out. You've taken these two lock and block pins out, the lock and block lifts right out. On a polymer 80, it extends all the way up to here, and you have a pin that holds it in. Now usually I can get this trigger out without having to take my lock and block out. Let's see if I can do it this time. I think I can. There it goes. I'll lift up and out of there. Now, I'm gonna move this out of the way. I'm gonna put these two trigger bars together so you can kind of see the difference in them. If you can't already tell, this is a Johnny Glocks trigger. This is my trigger, all right? You can already tell the amount of polishing that he's done to this trigger bar is phenomenal. He's also recontoured what you call the shark fin. You lay these next to each other, you can see how he's recontoured his from mine. It's almost like a semicircle, where this one is just straight. I haven't contoured mine yet, but I plan on doing it. But let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of what he really does. Once he recontours the shark fin, then he polishes the top of it to just a mirror shine. I mean, it is just as slick as you could ask for, and he does that for a reason. This moves on your safety plunger. This is what presses up on the safety plunger. So by radiusing these edges and then polishing this to a high shine, and then radiusing this and then polishing this up to a high shine, he creates less drag across that striker block. Now, another thing he does is he polishes the face of what they call the cruciform. If you look at this, it looks like a cross. They call this a cruciform, all right? This, from the factory, will normally have burrs and grooves in it. This is just a stamped part. They run these through a machine. It's a mass-produced gun. This is just a stamped part, and there's a lot of variation from one part to the next. Glock holds it within a certain tolerance, but if one is on one side of the tolerance and the other is on the other side of the tolerance, you're going to get two totally different trigger pulls. But what Johnny does is he cuts this, or doesn't really cut it. I think he does do a proprietary angle on it. I'm not really sure. But he smooths this down and then polishes it to a high shine. He also polishes the bird beak. That's what this thing's called. This thing is called the bird beak. He polishes this because the edge of that bird beak rides inside your connector. When your trigger's pulled, your connector is what starts to pull your cruciform down and allows the striker to fire. So he polishes this and this to just a high shine. He also polishes this because this rides inside your frame. He polishes this up so there's no resistance or drag from this to the inside of your frame. He also polishes your connector, and he puts a bevel on the upper edge of the connector. What that does is it forces your trigger bar back into its place on the connector after the shot's broken. So let me put this on here. These springs, sometimes they come on and off easy, sometimes they don't. This one likes to come on and off pretty easy. So, after your gun fires, your trigger bar drops down, your connector goes in like that, and your trigger rests somewhat like that, okay? Now, by having a downward angle on that bottom edge, it promotes your trigger bar to fall back into place. You hear that snap? It promotes it to fall back down into place, whereas opposed to just a sharp right angle. It allows it and encourages it to fall down into place. all right? He also tunes his connectors to a certain degree, which I'm not sure what degree he uses. It's a little soft on the reset for me, but I like it, so I'm not gonna change it. Now, comparing his connector to mine, all right? At first I told you he has a rolling break on his connector. I kind of like a sharp break. That's why the only connector that I use is a Lantac connector. I really like the Lantac connectors. I've used Ghost, I've used Lone Wolf, I use Lantac, I've used a ton of different connectors. Zev, my favorite one is the Lantac SSR 3.5. And the reason I do is because I like the break it gives me and the reset it gives me. Now, if you'll notice on mine, this one's kind of dirty because I've shot it, but I have polished the top edge of this shark fin. Not quite to the same level Johnny has on his, but I'm telling you, it's glass smooth. Another thing I've done is I've polished the leading edge of the cruciform right up in here. I've polished it to where it's very, very slick. I've also polished inside, outside, and on the top of the bird beak. Very important, because remember, that bird beak rides like this, so you want that to be perfectly smooth. I have also put a bevel on my connector right there. I take a stone, a hard Arkansas stone, and I put a bevel on it, a downward bevel like that, to also promote that coming back onto the connector. All right. Now, with a 4-pound striker spring and my setup, I can get a 2-pound or sub 2-pound trigger pull out of this gun. I've not done this yet, so I'm going to put this in there with the Johnny Glocks spring. It's a 4.5-pound spring, and I'm going to see what kind of trigger pull I can get on it like that. So let's see if we can get this thing back in here without having to take that locking block out. It went right in. Our trigger housing spring in, our pin. Put our top locking block pin in. Let's grab our slide stop, slide it on, put it back in till it clicks. Now we're all set up and ready to go. Now I'm going to assemble the slide, and we'll see what the trigger pull on mine is, and I'll show you the differences between his and mine. Now, the trigger pull on this one, I can already tell you it's under 2 pounds. So let's do a trigger pull test, see what it comes in at. Just like we did the other one. 2 pounds, 4 ounces basically. Two pounds, basically 2 ounces. And 2 pounds. All right, so my trigger pull is yielding basically the same weight as his, but what it's not doing is giving me the characteristics of his. Now you remember when I showed you the Johnny Glocks trigger, I showed you the take-up, and it was only about that much, right? Now look at this take-up. See how much take-up I have in this? I can't get that take-up out. But now, once the take-up's there, I hit a good firm wall. You're gonna see just a little bit of creep right there. Now the trigger's gonna break. Now, let me show you the reset on this. The reset is still pretty good. Not quite as short as Johnny's, but still good. That's the reset. Now you're gonna get a little creep right there, then the trigger breaks. Now, this trigger cost me about $35 to do. A lot of handwork, but it cost me about $35. This trigger was no handwork, but it cost me $200. Is it worth it? To me it is, all right, because he's done some things on here that I just can't do. One of the things he's done to eliminate pre-travel, all this, all right, is he's drilled and tapped a set screw, all right. What that set screw does is it comes through and it puts pressure on this trigger bar right here and will only allow it to come out so far. That's why I only have about that much trigger movement before the gun starts to fire, where I have this much trigger movement on this one. Another thing he's done, he has drilled and tapped a set screw that goes in here and it comes out right there. The way a Glock trigger works is it sets up on this ledge right there, all right? When you start to pull the trigger to the rear, it comes and it drops down off that ledge. You'll see there's a higher ledge here than here. This is where it drops down and allows the gun to fire. Well, if you'll look, there's a lot of room behind this part of the cruciform and this part of the trigger housing. What Johnny did is he took and put in that set screw. That way, as soon as that thing drops, the trigger stops moving to the rear, which is called over travel. The reason you want to remove over travel is because if you are shooting either competitively or bullseye, once you pull that trigger to the rear and the firing pin goes forward, you don't want that trigger to move anymore, because if it continues to move to the rear, then you're moving your sights off target. Minuscule, but just minuscule amounts mount up at 25, 50, 75, and 100 yards. If that trigger stops at the exact minute that your shot breaks, then you don't have the opportunity to move your sights off target. That's why he puts that over travel stop in there. It eliminates over travel. So he's eliminated most of my pre-travel with that set screw. He's eliminated most of my over travel with that set screw. Now, like I said before, this is $200, and in my opinion, worth every penny of it. This trigger was about $35, and in my opinion, worth more than every penny of it. This is a good, reliable 2.5 pound trigger pull. This is a good, reliable 2.5 pound trigger pull. But he gives you a lot of extras with this that you don't get in this. Now, if any of y'all are planning on trying your hand at a trigger job on a Glock, go for it, all right? Buy you a stock Glock trigger bar and go to town on it. It took me a long time to figure out how to get this type of trigger pull and be able to repeat it over and over and over again. I messed up a lot of trigger bars. I messed up a lot of cruciforms. Heck, I messed up some connectors. But if I were going to start with something like this, start by polishing the shark fin. Start by polishing the rear of the cruciform. Polish, not grind. Polish, because you don't want to change the angle and you don't want to take off too much metal. And then polish your striker leg. Again, I said polish, not grind. Polish. And then polish your firing pin block. If you do those things with one spring change, take it down to a 4.5 pound string, spring, it will still give you great reliability, but it'll give you an even better trigger pull. So if y'all are ever interested in doing a Glock trigger job, kind of follow along with that, and maybe it'll help you. Again, if y'all are interested in a hat, Downrange Hat Company, look him up on Instagram. He makes good hats. Like I said, he can do pretty much any design you want him to do, and any lettering, font, any of that you want on pretty much any style hat, and he does it at a reasonable price. And he's a really good guy, so give him a shot. And also, for people that are interested in working on their own guns, try to do a trigger job on your Glock sometime. You're never going to learn how to do it if you don't try. Get in there and try it. Just remember, on those areas like the striker leg and the rear of the cruciform, be careful with those areas. Polish them, don't grind them. And you might be surprised on what you can achieve without going out and spending $200 on a trigger. Like I said, I do believe Johnny's trigger is worth $200. He's put $200 worth of work in that trigger. He's actually put more than that into that trigger. But you can achieve something similar with just a fraction of the cost. So try it out sometime. My whole goal of this video is trying to get people to get out there and do their own type of gunsmithing work, showing them that it's really not that hard if you know what you're doing, and you can sit back and have some pride in the work that you've put into that gun. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'm going to put it on YouTube, and we'll see how it goes. Y'all have a good night.